Alright, next up we've got the Shadowcraft and Bloodcraft cards. So, typically I've been trying to keep the legendaries towards the end of each section, however with Shadowcraft's legendary, I think it would be prudent to start with her. So let's get right to it. It's Nephthys, an 8-cost 5/5 with a very interesting fanfare. She randomly puts followers of different costs, with the exception of herself, from your deck into play until your area is full, and then she destroys them. Oof, so this is a very interesting card and perhaps the most challenging sort of deck building card in the entire set. What her effect essentially incentivizes you to do is build a deck with followers that only fit into 4 different cost brackets. So for example, only running 2 cost, 3 cost, 4 cost, and 8 cost followers as an example. And within those brackets, you mainly want powerful last word effects that will trigger when they are destroyed by Nephthys' effect. So I hope you can see why I'm starting with Nephthys, because a lot of her value is based on if Shadowcraft has some powerful last word effects to go with her. In the base game, those options come down to Skull Beast, Skull Cradle Widow, Rabbit Necromancer, Skeleton Knight, Necroelementalist, Spartoy Soldier, Bone Chimera, Hell's Unleasher, Malicious Ghost, Gravewalker, Ghostly Rider, Undead King, and the big one, Mordecai. I have to imagine that any deck that will be trying to run Nephthys will also be running Mordecai, because that is just such a huge amount of value to be getting out of her. So that's the 8-cost slot kind of locked down. At the 2-cost slot, you have some kind of weak options with Skullcradle Widow and the neutral option of the Bellringer Angel, which, sure, drawing a card is nice, but you also need to not die in the early game, right? So maybe you just accept that sometimes your 2-drop pull from Nephthys is just not going to do anything, and you put in some of their other good 2-drops. Mind you, I say all of these things, but of course, Shadowcraft got new cards in the expansion too, and some of them have very powerful last words, because Cygames is not an idiot developer that forgets to give synergy to cards that they introduce. Perhaps with the introduction of quite a few powerful last word effects, this deck and this kind of idea of having a last word focused Shadowcraft deck will actually go somewhere. As for Nephthys herself, I'm really not sure what to think of her. Out of all of the cards in the expansion, I think she is the single hardest card to properly evaluate. Like seriously, I look at her and I hold my head and it's like my brain is full of fuck. At the bare minimum, I can say that she will definitely see play in some very fun, interesting, and experimental decks, and who knows, maybe she'll actually be good. So as we move on to the rest of these cards, just keep Nephthys in the back of your mind. Let's start by taking a look at the Lurching Corpse, a 2-cost 1/2 that can only attack the enemy leader and followers with ward, and it has a last word of destroying a random enemy follower. So you know how I said that there weren't any good 2-drop last word cards for Nephthys to pull? Well, look at this guy. In kind of a weird way, you should think of these last words as potentially being part of the fanfare of Nephthys when you play her. So having Nephthys destroy a random enemy follower when you play her is a really good deal, I think. So I think that any list that will be running Nephthys will absolutely be running this guy as well. Even outside of Nephthys, I actually think this card's pretty good. He presents this very tricky sort of obstacle for your opponent to try to stumble their way past. Or, lurch their way past, as the case may be. Haha, jokes. Aside from that, the fact that you can't kill him yourself particularly easily does make him a bit awkward to use effectively. But I think between the potential potency of his effect as well as the overall awkwardness that he brings to the table means that he will probably see play in any of the control shadow lists. Next up we've got Ghosthound Sexton, a 2-cost 2/2, who is kind of like the Royal Banner in that he gives a buff to all present and future followers as long as he remains in play. That buff being that any follower that would be banished is instead destroyed. So Cudgel Priests will no longer deny you your last words or shadows. Likewise, if you happen to summon any ghosts, they will actually provide you shadows because they will be destroyed rather than being banished by their own effect. Those are all pretty cute sounding effects, but I really don't see it being worth a deck slot. Like, sure, getting your last words banished does suck, but does it happen often enough to include this guy in your list? I sincerely doubt that, and while the Ghost synergy is cute, and perhaps in future expansions will amount to something, I don't think it's actually going anywhere yet. so maybe we'll return to Sexton in the future, but it's not his time yet. Now we've got another kinda weird card, it's the Shadow Reaper, a 2-cost 1/1 with a fanfare of gain ambush until the end of your opponent's next turn, and also he gains +1/+1 every time an allied follower is destroyed. So I suppose you could combo this guy and Sexton and Ghost Summoning, but I don't know about that. He's kind of a weird card. I see him as being sort of like an aggro card in that he is a big fat dude that you play for cheap that you would then want to go face with, but also he sort of requires you to trade your followers in, which is not really what aggro wants to do. And for every other deck archetype, I can't really see what they would actually want to do with Shadow Reaper. So the effect is cute, and again, like Sexton, in the future he could be broken, but he's not there yet. And now we've got the Feathered Patroller, a 3-cost 3/2 with Ward, and for a Necromancy of 4, she deals 2 damage to an enemy follower. So that's a very stat-efficient card that is doing quite a bit for a very low playpoint cost. I think my main concern would be if you could reliably activate her Necromancy effect on turn 3. A lot of the time I imagine the answer will be no, in which case she is just a 3-cost 3/2 with Ward, which, while not amazing, is perhaps all you really need against a hyper-aggressive deck. In later stages of the game, when you can play her and get the Necromancy effect, and then play something else alongside her, then we might be talking about a very powerful card. So while she is a little bit borderline, just like all of Shadowcraft's other low-cost Necromancy effects, I think she is good enough to see play in Control Shadow. Next up, we've got the Necroassassin, a 4-cost 3/3 with fanfare. If you have an allied follower in play, destroy an allied follower and a random enemy follower. So obvious synergy with any of your powerful last word effects or your ghost providers. I really like this card because she takes advantage of Shadowcraft's unique strength while providing you a very good upside. The fact that she kills a random enemy follower does suck, but I think you can play around it to a reasonable degree. And sometimes, yeah, you're not going to have any good allied followers to kill, but I think in the right deck, in the right hands, she will be a very powerful addition. So let's talk about some of the spells Shadowcraft got this expansion, starting with the Voices of Resentment. 3-cost, summon 2 ghosts, and for an enhance of 8, you then give the summoned ghosts Bane. Getting 2 ghosts for 3-cost is pretty marginal, but I suppose against aggressive decks there is some value to that. The enhanced version is technically efficient in that you are killing 2 followers at 4 play points each, but the fact that you have to wait until turn 8 and then invest all of those play points all at once is quite a hard ask. In really heavy control decks, you might consider this option just because it's okay against aggro and pretty okay against control, and it does have synergy with your Necroassassins and your soul conversions, but all things considered, I think you can do a bit better. Next up, we've got the Ghostly Grasp. 1-cost, destroy an enemy follower with 1 defense. But if you have enough shadows, you can choose to use Necromancy 8 to destroy an enemy with 2 or more defense instead. So this is a very extreme card. 1 play point to destroy any follower is quite impressive, but we really need to take a look at the Necromancy part of it. If we compare this to something like Execution, you're effectively trading 8 shadows for 4 play points. And to be honest with you, I don't think that's worth it. So many of Shadowcraft's best cards require shadows to activate, and this is using up quite a damn few. I think the only deck that would consider this is a deck that doesn't actually run too many Necromancy effects, and can therefore afford to actually blow all of its shadows on this effect. But in such a deck, you're probably not going to be running Shadow Generation if this is your only use for it, so how are you going to get 8 shadows consistently to actually use this card effectively? Sure, it'll happen eventually, but will it happen soon enough and consistently enough to actually be worth putting this in your deck? I'm not convinced. That said though, I expect to come back to this card in the future because it is so incredibly efficient. And if Shadowcraft gets some really amazing ways to generate shadows, this card could very quickly become busted. But it's not quite there yet. So let's talk about a spell that is good enough. 3-cost, Pact of the Nether God. Destroy an enemy follower with 4 or less defense, and then for enhance of 7, then you summon a Pluto and give it +X+Y, where X equals the attack and Y equals the defense of the destroyed follower. This continues that trend of them stapling bad legendaries onto enhance effects, Although in this card's case, it's very interesting, the enhanced version of this card is actually cheaper than running Pluto, who costs 8 normally. This is one of those enhanced cards where the baseline effect is good enough that if that's all it was, it would still see play. Destroying an enemy follower with 4 or less defense for 3 costs is pretty good, honestly. It helps you out against some of the beefier enemies that aggressive decks run, and it helps you deal with some of the bigger threats after they've evolved and traded into one of your followers. I mean, think about it, there are plenty of times where there's just an errant Floral Fencer or Cudgel Priest lying around on the board after it's been evolved and traded into one of your things. You can play this, mop it up, and then still have enough play points left over to develop something of your own. And then, say you're going up against, I don't know, Control Sword. They evolve one of their larger followers and slam it into one of yours. Then you play the enhanced version of this card, which kills their follower and develops one of your own. If we say that it kills, I don't know, a 5/3 or something, then you'll be left with a 6/4 Pluto on the board. That's a large enough follower that they're going to need to either burn removal on it or burn an evolution point on it. Either way, that's a hell of a win for you. And considering that this is a card that you're putting into your deck to help deal with aggressive decks, being able to turn it into a mid to late game threat is actually quite impressive. For one deck slot, you're covering your ass against multiple archetypes. And I think that flexibility combined with the overall power of both options means that this card will definitely see play. Next up, we've got Balor, 6 cost 3/6, with Bane and last word, deal 3 damage to all enemy followers. I'm sort of unsure of how to think of this card. It's a high health follower with Bane, so it's very annoying to deal with, and that's quite a meaty AoE at 3 damage. So in that respect, it's kind of like both anti-control because it has the Bane and can probably survive multiple attacks, and also anti-aggro because it has the AoE. But in both cases, I wonder if it's too slow. It doesn't have Rush or anything, so it can't take advantage of the Bane effect immediately, and ironically, that high health actually makes it kind of annoying to trigger that last word when you want it. So I'm kind of left wondering if it's good enough to make the cut. I suppose it's worth noting at least that it's a pretty good effect to be getting from Nephthys. But for other decks, I'm willing to be proven wrong on this one, but I don't think it's quite good enough to make the cut. What I do think is good enough to make the cut is Underworld Watchman Khawy, 7 cost 4/5 with ward and last word, randomly destroy one of the strongest enemy followers in play, then restore X defense to your leader, where X equals the destroyed follower's attack. Now, one thing I'm not too sure about is what it actually means by strongest enemy follower. Like, does it mean the one with the highest play point cost, or does it mean the one with the highest attack? I would assume the latter, based on the rest of its text, but it's not totally clear. In any case, this card is amazing in a control deck. Sure, it's 2/2 under the curve for a 7-drop, and I'm not gonna try and say that that's irrelevant. But it has ward, so it's not like your opponent can just ignore it either. And that last word is quite something. Outside of very specific scenarios, it's very rarely going to lead to those ridiculous blowout turns, where you blow up your opponent's like 8 attack follower and get 8 health in return as well. And sure, sometimes they won't have any followers for him to blow up, and that'll suck, but I think it's fair to assume you'll blow up, I don't know, something with like 3 attack, 4 attack maybe? Really, against like an aggressive deck, almost any result is amazing. And that's not even getting into the synergy with Nephthys. Like, it really works well in that deck, both because you can play him and he will help keep you alive long enough to play Nephthys, and then he's also a very, very good card to get off of Nephthys. In any case, I believe this guy's last word is strong enough that if Control Shadow of any variety, Nephthys or otherwise, does exist in the expansion, this guy will see play. Anyway, let's move on to the Bloodcraft cards, starting with Yurius, Levin, Duke, 2 cost 1/3, and whenever an enemy follower comes into play, you deal 1 damage to the enemy leader. Seems like a really solid aggro card. In some matchups he'll be next to worthless, like against D-Shift, but if Forcecraft tries to spam out fairies to get up a giant Ancient Elf, they're gonna take a lot of damage in the process. And 3 health is actually pretty hard to deal with on turn 2. So yeah, pretty simple effect, but I think he's good enough to see play. Next up we've got the Alpha Wolfman, a 3 cost 2/2 with Bane, and if Vengeance is active for you, you summon another Alpha Wolfman. Kind of a weird one, I'm not really sure how to value that doubling effect of his, but being a cheap Bane that doesn't just die to a 1 damage ping means that he probably has value on that alone. My gut instinct is that he's not quite good enough and that the Vengeance effect is not really worth it, But who knows, I mean, most control blood lists that I've seen don't actually run any 3-drop, so maybe he's good enough to replace a Unica or something. Well, I could see it happening. Next up, we've got Vania's older brother, Veight the Vampire Noble. 3-cost 3/2 with Ward and Clash, summon a Forest Bat. He makes for a really good supporter for Vania too, just like a proper Oni-chan should. Ward plus Clash is a pretty good combo, because most of the time they're not going to be able to just ignore him. And in the case where you actually did curve Vania into Veight, they're probably not going to want to blow removal on him either, considering that Vania is the slightly more dangerous of the pair. He's also a very good 3-drop, which, like I mentioned back with the Alpha Wolfman, Control Blood is kind of missing. Not to say that he's just for control decks, he's possibly good enough in bat-based aggressive decks as well. So yeah, solid card. The only thing I'm not too sure about is why he's a silver when his little sister is a gold. I wonder if there's some lore there that I'm missing, but it just feels weird, you know? And now we've got Moriana the Bejeweled. 4-cost 3/3, and she recovers 1 evolution point for you if Vengeance is active. So one thing that I'm curious about, and that I don't actually know, is if you are going first, can she bring you up from 2 evolution points to 3? If so, that actually kind of improves my opinion on her, because it means that you could hypothetically play her on curve and actually take advantage of her effect. Of course, being in Vengeance on turn 4 is kind of a intriguing position to be in, but, you know, it's there. In any case, this is an example of a card that is actually worth being in Vengeance for. So many of Bloodcraft's other cards that are Vengeance-based are all like, oh yeah, +2 attack, gain drain, whoop-de-fucking-do. So often you're just going to get burst down from 10 HP, and that's why Vengeance is so hard to really justify taking advantage of. Control Blood doesn't really run that many cards with Vengeance, and Aggro Blood basically ignores it completely outside of the list that run Dark General. Gaining an evolution point, though, is actually worth the effort. So I think this is a very cool card. I like the direction that Cygames is going with Vengeance, and while I am not 100% convinced that she will make any final versions of deck lists, if she does, I imagine she will be a very powerful component. Alright, let's talk about some spells, starting with the Executioner's Axe. 1 cost, give an allied follower a rush, and for an enhance of 4, you then give it +2/+2. So when I initially saw this card, I can't say I was too impressed. But after going through the list of Bloodcraft followers and seeing what they have, I've sort of improved my opinion on it. Aside from just general killing one of their dudes with one of your dudes purposes, I figure it's decent on Medusa, followers with Bane or with Drain, or followers with Clash. In that last instance, I don't think it's too good with Veight, but there is one other follower with Clash that we'll be talking about later on in the video, so keep that in mind. In the case of Medusa or followers with Bane, the 1-cost version pretty much suffices. And in the case of followers with Drain, having the option to gain +2/+2 to improve the damage that you are dealing and likewise the amount of HP that you are restoring is pretty nice. The enhanced version is kind of expensive for what it's doing, but I think that might be an acceptable price to pay. I mean, you're effectively paying 4 play points and a card to imitate an evolution point. While that might be a tad too expensive in some cases, having the option, particularly when you don't have any evolution points remaining, is nice, I think. Still, though, I'm always wary of these kind of combo cards that don't do anything at all by themselves. Sometimes they just whiff and you can't really do anything productive with them. Granted, it's not that hard to find 1 play point, and getting Rush is never useless, but still, I don't want to say it'll see play just because I wonder if having cards that actually do things by themselves would be better. At the very least, I imagine Control Blood will try it because they already run the Righteous Devil, which gains Bane and Drain when you're in Vengeance. But whether or not it turns out to be worth the deck slot kind of remains to be seen. My bet's on no, but it could happen. Next up on the spell side of things, we've got Sadistic Night. For 3 play points and 2 damage to your leader, you deal 6 damage to an enemy follower. This, I think, is a very solid card both in control as well as in aggro. In control, the benefits are obvious. 6 damage is enough to kill almost any follower that actually sees play in Constructed, and doing that for 3 cost is pretty nice, and the 2 damage to you might even be a benefit if it's getting you into Vengeance. On the aggressive side, the reason why I think this card will see play is because it is one of the most efficient possible answers to an early Ancient Elf. That's one of the real showstoppers for an aggressive deck, so being able to answer that on 3 play points is a godsend. Same deal for any of the other particularly large wards out there. Aurelia maybe not so much, because she's probably going to be immune, but hey, what are you gonna do? So yeah, really solid card, and I definitely think it will see play. Oh, you want me to talk about the enhanced version? Well, don't play it when you have 7 playpoint orbs. Yep. Moving right along, we've got the Squall Lancer. 5 cost 4/5, and as a fanfare, she deals 2 damage to an enemy follower if Vengeance is active for you, and she does the same thing without the Vengeance requirement if you evolve her. So she's another one of those 5 cost evolve followers, which I do like to see. But I wonder if she's good enough to edge out the Wardrobe Raider. That one already does 2 damage for an evolution effect, and it gives you 2 HP. The healing part in particular is a big part of why Control likes the card. Basically, a lot of this card's viability comes down to how easy it is and how safe it is to get down to Vengeance in around the turn 5 area. Even then though, I wonder if maybe they would run Wardrobe Raider anyway just for that 2 HP. Hard to say, but we'll have to see. My bet's on no, but who knows. Next up, we've got the Flood Behemoth. 6 cost, 4/6, and has a clash of deal 1 damage to all enemy followers. This guy just seems great. He's technically 1 stat point off of curb, but he's dealing 1 damage as part of his clash, so he's dealing 5 damage to anything that he does combat with. As always, there's something to be said about the relevance of a 1 damage AoE in the later stages of the game, but I can't imagine that Forestcraft decks will just disappear overnight, so he'll probably find targets. One thing that I'm actually not too sure about is the order that Clash takes place in, which is to say, does it take place before damage is dealt or after? If it's before, then that means that he'd be able to attack into something with 1 HP, and then not receive any damage in return because the clash would kill it. That being said, that sounds really stupid, so I don't imagine it works that way, but I just thought I'd bring it up. In any case, he seems like a pretty decent card. He might get pushed out by the more immediately impactful cards like Alucard or Temptress Vampire, but I do believe he'll still see some play. Last but not least, we have the Bloodhungry Matriarch, Bloodcraft's legendary for this set. 7 cost 4/5, and as a fanfare, she deals 2 damage to all enemy followers. As well, whenever an enemy follower is destroyed, she deals 1 damage to the enemy leader. I feel pretty confident in calling this a very good card. Obviously, she's pretty good in control, it's a 2 damage AoE, and she can help you close out games. But I think she might actually be good enough for aggro. You don't normally think of big 7-drop legendaries as being a part of aggro lists, but I think what she does for you is good enough to warrant it. Think about it. It's turn 7, you've started to lose control of the board, your opponent has traded into all of your followers, and all of their followers are kind of hanging around at low health because they've done value trades, because they can't afford to go face. Then Bloodhungry Matriarch comes down, sweeps their board, and does like 3 damage to them. And at first that might not sound like a lot, but that lets you steal games where your deck otherwise would have completely run out of steam. She essentially punishes your opponent for making the plays that they need to survive. And for an aggressive deck, I think that's a pretty good deal. So, good card, very good tool for control blood, and I imagine she'll at least be tried in aggressive blood lists as well. Anyway, that about wraps things up for this part. Next time we'll be talking about the Havencraft cards as well as the neutral cards, so stay tuned for that.